everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Love Like Crazy. We're your hosts, Jay and Stacy Coleman. Thank you so much for joining us today. And listeners, we just love that you've been joining in, and thank you for sharing and following and subscribing to our YouTube channel. And also, thank you for giving us the ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, because that helps us to get the word out about this podcast. So thank you so very much. And today we have a very special guest with you, a dear friend of mine. Her name is Kim Haar. And let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump into a conversation. Kim Haar is a writer, speaker, podcaster, licensed professional counselor, and guest radio co-host. She has almost 2 decades of experience helping others find healing and wholeness in life. She has a private practice called There's Hope Counseling in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she sees couples, families, women, and adolescents. In addition to her professional accomplishments, Kim's greatest joys are found in her roles as a wife, mother, a recent grandmother, and follower of Jesus. And so we are so very excited. Jay and I are ready to welcome our guest, Kim Haar, to Love Like Crazy.
Hey, Kim, it's great to have you with us today.
It is a pleasure to be there. Thank you.
Why don't we do this as we jump into this? We're going to have a great conversation today talking about divorce. And really, we did an episode a while back called Affair Proofing Your Marriage. And so today, I think we would kind of call today Divorce Proofing Your Marriage, or doing the best you can.
Yeah, the top reasons.
I'm curious. I want to know if you would take a moment and just kind of share a little bit of your story about yourself and kind of what you have walked through, and maybe to where you are today. But take a couple moments and let our listeners know a little bit about Kim.
Sure. Well, I actually became a therapist because I was in a marriage and went for counseling and didn't feel like I got great counsel. And so I decided to go back to school and learn how to be a hope giver. And so even though I see lots of different things in counseling, one of my specialties is marriage. Unfortunately, my first marriage did end in divorce. And I had to go through a healing process. I am remarried, very happily remarried. And so I've seen the hard, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the wonderful. And I used both my professional experience and my personal and professional experience to help others.
Okay. Well, now let me ask you this. In regards to what the family looks like today, I know that there's a lot of divorce rates that are thrown out there, a lot of families that unfortunately, and I do a lot of premarital counseling. One of the things in ministry that I thoroughly enjoy doing is I love doing weddings. One of the prerequisites, though, is if you want me to do your wedding, you have to go through premarital counseling. A lot of couples don't get counseling whenever they're getting ready to get married, so the expectations that they have whenever they step into marriage might be a little unrealistic. Do you kind of find that as well in dealing with marriage, that maybe people have some unrealistic ideas as to what marriage should look like?
They absolutely do. And unfortunately, it has become so easy to get married. In fact, sometimes I'm really discouraged by seeing how you can just send in a paper to go get where you can become an officiant of a wedding. And the meaning of marriages has become so non-sacred, non-committal. It's something we do. And so I see a lot of couples that will come. Now, I do a lot of premarital counseling, and it's as intense as my marital counseling because I want to give them these skills before they ever get married. Because too many people go into marriage thinking, I'm going to marry somebody and they're going to complete me. And so the unrealistic expectations are, you are there to make me happy. And then when we run into unhappiness, we run for divorce.
Reality is an imperfect person will never complete you. The only person who can one who can complete you is a perfect God.
That's correct.
I know that we have shared the line. It's cheesy.
From Jerry Maguire.
From Jerry Maguire. Stacey, you remember this?
Oh yeah, you complete me.
You complete me, and it's the dumbest thing. It is the cheesiest thing, but I think that you're right. A lot of people look for somebody to complete them, and the only one who can complete you is God.
Yeah. And I'm
so
glad to hear that you're doing premarital counseling, through your counseling services as well, because it's so needed. Jay and I, what premarital counseling we had was not all that, and so that's one of the reasons why we are determined as well to make that a prerequisite, because it's needed. Honestly, they need to know some things before they enter into a covenant, because that's what it truly is, a covenant.
So what is your premarital
Absolutely.
what does your premarital counseling look like? What are some of the things you're going to cover in your premarital counseling?
My premarital counseling is actually pretty in depth. I use some assessments where I have couples complete them individually, and I get reports back on assessments where we look at things like the family of origin. How, what was that family of origin like in relationships, conflict? How was love shown? Because so often what we do is we may say we're never going to be like our family of origin, but when stress happens, we usually become like our family of origin. And so we look at family enmeshment or estrangement. We look at ideas of how do we both look at finances? How do we both look at our ideas with children? What are our ideas of sex? What are our ideas of it, separateness as well as togetherness? So it's a pretty in-depth premarital counseling. I would say I probably meet with couples anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of sessions, and we spread it out, and I give them homework in between. So I will have them come back with homework that says, why do you want to marry this person? And why is now the right time?
Okay, well, I will tell you, we may have another conversation, and if there's a possibility of sharing some resources, because the reason my mindset behind that is, I would much rather equip you than have to counsel you later down the road as you're headed towards divorce. And there are a lot of reasons why people get divorced, but possibly one of the greatest reasons is because they don't prepare going into the marriage, or they have expectations that are not that realistic. Stacey's absolutely right. Our premarital counseling when we got married was more or less, we met with the pastor one time, and it kind of looked like this. Oh, you want to get married? Okay, praise the Lord. Let's pray for you. And that was pretty much it. And so going into pastoring and starting to do weddings, one of the things that I set up our counseling with was the mindset of, if somebody had sat with us, here are the things we argued and fought about. And I wish that somebody had talked to us about these things. And just so happens that a lot of those things are the top reasons for divorce in America. So, you hear a lot of stats. 50% of all marriages wind up in divorce court. That's not entirely true. I think that it's the mid 40s. The first marriage winds up in divorce court. The lower 50% that wind up in divorce court for the second marriage, and the low 60s for the third. Somewhere along those lines. Those statistics might be a little bit off, but in other words, the more you get married, the higher your divorce rate goes. So let's kind of take a little bit of time to talk about that. Some of the top reasons, as a counselor, what are the reasons that people come see you and say, hey, we're struggling? What are the top reasons that you find?
Sure. And before I say that, let me just say, even though it seems like some of the divorce statistics have been going down a little bit, so have the statistics of people getting married. Because people are cohabitating more now before getting married or instead of getting married. So some of the statistics, though it may look like divorce may be going down, so is marriage. And people that cohabitate together before marriage, they are actually more likely to get divorced. And so some of that is other reasons for divorce. Or why people come in to see me is, first of all, people come in to see me for marriage counseling. Too often it's they're at the end of the rope. They've already made up their minds. Hey, they've been throwing around the words of divorce. Unfortunately, that becomes almost like a weapon that they will use, saying, well, let's just go get divorced. And that becomes a culture of, well, now that we've spoken this out, now we use it more and more often. Other reasons for divorce is, things like lack of commitment, unhealthy conflict. We never learn how to have conflict. People either run away from conflict and they avoid and they stuff and they put things under the carpet, or they can be really aggressive, and conflict can be like bullying and hurtful. So there's not good conflict skills. There's reasons of infidelity and affairs, although even marriages with infidelity and affairs, they can become wonderful marriages if the work is done and if it becomes a healthy marriage. There's, money is always, it can be an issue. Blended families can be an issue. There's a whole lot of issues that I see couples for. My favorite ones, though, are the ones that are saying, hey, we're coming in because we're beginning to struggle with this. Can you help us? And they really want change.
Do you have couples who come to see you that basically it's a done deal? They've already made up their mind. It doesn't matter what you tell us. Or maybe one spouse is and the other spouse isn't. Like, hey, I'm coming to see you just because we need counseling, but it's not going to work. Do you see that?
I do. In fact, when I have couples come into my office, I will ask them on a scale of 0 to 10. If 10 is when we leave here, we're going to go file for divorce, and 0 is there's no chance we're going to get a divorce. We are in this, we want to make this work. I'll say, where are you? And I say it amazes me, but it doesn't. I've gotten used to this where usually the women are at a higher number. They may say, well, I'm at a 7 or an 8. And their husbands will look at them like with deer in the headlights look, and they'll say, well, I was at a 2. I had no clue you were there. And wives may have been asking husbands for a really long time to go to counseling, and they put it off. No, we don't need it. So by the time sometimes a wife comes, she's at the end of the rope and she's already checked out. And 70% of divorces are actually filed by women.
Mm.
Okay, I did not know that
No, I didn't know
statistic.
that either.
I did not know that. So that's a good one. I'm putting that in the bank to be able to use that down the road. Here's a thought though, and I'm just going to speak to the guys who are listening to this today. The first time that your wife asks you to go, hey, we need counseling, you need to go get counseling right then. Because when she says that the first time, she's not joking around. She really means it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times guys think, oh, well, it's not really needed, or it's not manly for me to go to counseling. Your marriage is worth investing in. Your marriage is worth fighting for. So go see a counselor, go see your pastor, sit down and talk with somebody.
Because don't you agree that, couples need that outside observation? Like maybe they can't really see exactly what the problem is. They know that there are issues. We don't quite understand why we're fighting all the time, or they're already using what we called the D word. We said we would never use the word divorce, but they're having these issues, and it helps to have, an outside person who is observing and that can give, that needed counsel and kind of point them in the right direction to help them process things. And I think people too often want to just shut down and say, oh, well, I don't need any help. At this point or whatever. But to pursue that healing so that there can be the healthy relationship, counseling is such a viable option. And in years past, we've, heard of, well, if you go to counseling, you must be crazy, that type of thing. But it's not crazy to ask for help and to seek help.
It's actually a sign of strength, because
Yes, I agree.
pride gets in the way of not going to counseling. And you say you're not crazy if you go to counseling. I like to say you're crazy if you don't go to counseling.
I
That's
agree
true.
with you.
Because a lot of times I like to kind of laugh and say I'm like an orchestra leader or a choir director, sometimes in marriage counseling sessions, because I can watch and see somebody may say something to a partner, and I can see how the partner is hearing that and internalizing it, whether it's something is said and it feels like an accusation, and I'm able to see that and pause in that moment and slow that part down and be able to get partners to be able to communicate in ways that feel safe,
Yes.
and in ways that many times we're hearing each other's hearts for the first time, because we've been so caught up in just bouncing from one defense mechanism to another. We get into an argument, and the more you yell, the more I pout. The more I pout and accuse, the more you blame. And so we get stuck
Right.
like a pinball game in our defenses, and we never get down to where we can really just share about our hearts.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
That's good.
in that mindset, let's kind of go through the top reasons that people do go through divorce. I know that, we've already kind of talked about this. Whenever I do premarital counseling, we do about 4 sessions. And the first session is, why do you want to get married in the first place? And then we're going to look at scripture, why God says that marriage is a good thing. Then we're going to go through, we're going to do a session on communication. We're going to do a session on finances. Where do you stand in regards to your finances? We're going to do the last session on healthy bedroom life.
Mhm.
These reasons, communication, finances, sexual issues, how do you walk people through this and deal with these things? Because I know you see all of them. You see all of the reasons why people are struggling.
I do. I think the important thing is we take them one at a time. And the very, very first one, though, that I typically try to begin with is how do we begin to have healthy communication conflict? They're actually all related because we can't talk about money if we get into conflict about it all the time and we don't have healthy skills. We can't talk about bedroom issues if we're, criticizing or blaming or minimizing or denying. So the very first thing I do is let's set it up where we can actually begin to share things. Let me give you, for instance, and I know it sounds very therapy-y, but it's sometimes as simple as I can tell you, you are so disrespectful and you disrespected me and I can't believe you did this. And when you did this, I was hurt. And I'm communicating, I'm hurt and angry, but your defenses are going up. And so the very beginning is teaching people to say, you know what, whether it was your intention or not, I felt disrespected. I felt disrespected. This hurt my feelings. So there's really a part of a tool of learning how do I actually share from my perspective and get couples to see my perspective is as valid as yours and your perspective is as valid as mine. And once we can listen, and when we listen to understand, not to respond. Because so often we listen, and while you're talking to me, my brain's already thinking about how I'm going to respond, why you're
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And so there's a part of
Yes.
really learning how can we make that space where I can hear your perspective, and it's okay that I don't agree with it. It's okay that I'm not convinced of that. It's more about I'm going to hold it that if you say this, I'm going to believe that you feel this way. And then we can move to, okay, now what do we want to do? So it's not about agreeing and not about changing our spouses because too often we want to change our spouses. And when we're wanting to change our spouses, we're getting into the power struggles, and it's really teaching that we are two individuals. We're a me and a me, and we bring together a we, but we also can have different opinions and ideas and thoughts, and we need to learn to compromise.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is kind of it's a thread that we have had all throughout this podcast almost from day one. Of course, it goes along the mindset of repentance, but it is you can't have a healthy marriage if you're trying to change and work on your spouse. You can only have a healthy marriage if you are working on yourself and allowing God to change you.
That's correct. It's learning to take accountability for my part.
Okay. Okay.
And one of the things I've noticed too in like getting in arguments, a lot of times we want to like automatically blame the other person. Like, well, like you said, you disrespected me, you did this, you did that, instead of saying, this is, I feel this way, or I need, to be able to communicate more in a healthy way. You agree with that? That's
Absolutely. Well, and there's something called a softened startup that when it's almost like how I say something is so important because
mm-hmm.
communication is so much about my body language, my tone of voice, because
Yes.
I can say everything right, but if I'm looking at you, my body I can roll my eyes and sigh and I can say
Mm-hmm.
fine. But
Yes.
so it's really
Whatever.
very it's going into a hard attitude of how are we going to have these conversations. And I always say don't do it when you're angry. It's setting a time, setting a place. Don't bombard each other because if we call a friend and we say, hey, is this a good time to talk? And if a friend says no, we're usually not offended. We usually say, what's a good time to talk?
Right.
Yet with our spouses, too often we get into if I want to talk about something, we need to talk about it right now, right
Right
here,
now.
my
Mm-hmm.
way. And so we
Mm-hmm.
set the tone already that this isn't going to be a healthy conversation.
Right. Right.
Okay, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Because, honestly, I never really thought about that. It's like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times when you're dealing with people, you always have one that I call them the pusher in the sense of we've got to deal with this right now and resolve this
Mm-hmm.
right now. And it's like you can't fix things in the heat of the moment because all you're doing
Right.
is flaring up your emotions. to have the I like the analogy that you used. If you call a friend, hey, is it a good time? Yes or no. And we don't get offended and ramped up if they say no. So that I like that. That's just good practical advice right
Well,
there.
I'll go ahead and admit and be honest that I'm probably the pusher because I've often said, well, when things are like stirring, I've got to get it out right then. And I can honestly say I've never said, "Hey, is this a good time for me to vent to you about what I'm feeling right now?" So that has caused problems for
And
sure.
what I do though, a lot of times what happens is when you've got one person that tends to be more the pusher, many times it's because if we don't have this conversation now, we're never going to have it. Because I can
Yes.
have one pursuer, one withdrawer. And so I go over a list of things, when I'm working with couples, and I'll say one of the things you can't do is you cannot refuse to have a conversation. So if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I need to talk about this," you cannot say, "I'm not going to talk about it." Nope, not going to talk about it. What you can say is, "I'm not ready to talk about that right now." But if you say that, you have to give a time within 24 hours, 48 hours to say,
Yes.
"Not now, but when." So I'm committing. So you know what? Tomorrow, when I get home from work, we're going to go to the kitchen table. Let's sit down. And so then the pursuer can actually step back a little bit because they know we're going to have this conversation.
Well, here's a bad habit in regards to that. You things settle down, they calm down a little bit, and then you're like, you know what? Things are going all right, so let's just kind of move forward and not broach that subject because we don't want to stir this up again. But you've got to broach that subject because you have not really resolved the issue.
Because it's going to pop back up.
Correct. If you just keep sweeping it under the rug.
Yep. Well, and when Stacey was saying, when you're feeling that emotion and you're like, okay, this is when I'm really feeling it, I encourage you, write it down at that point. Write down, but write down not what somebody else did, because when we're in that heat of that emotion, I can tell you everything you've done wrong and how you're a screw up. Whereas if I'm writing it down, I'm saying, what do I want you to know? I want you to know I was hurt. This is frustrating. And it actually slows my brain down. So I get out of just emotion brain and I pull on my logic brain. And when I bring the two together, now I can operate in a wise mind. Now I can be proactive. So it's not pushing it off. It's saying not now, but when.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I want to kind of change the topic of look, this is great. We could talk about this all day long.
Mhm.
But in regards to all of this we're talking about, a lot of times women are ready to talk about stuff and men are not ready to talk about stuff because men and women are so different. One of the things that I've discovered through the years of spending time with couples, and I say this a lot, I said this from the pulpit before, opposites attract. And then after you get married, opposites attack because the cute little things, the things you loved about each other that were so different about yourself after you get married and you're living together, they're not so cute anymore. So let's kind of talk about the differences between men and women. I recognize that
Sure.
women are more emotional than men, and a lot of times women are more ready to talk about something and communicate something as opposed to a man just kind of shutting down and bottling things up. So can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, when couples come into my office, they present with different complaints. A man will come in here, and one of the biggest things that I hear from men is they're frustrated, they feel controlled, they feel judged, accused, not good enough. They feel like they're just a paycheck. Or a big complaint is, I haven't had sex in, however long it's been. And that physical relationship is, if you could just get her to give me some sex, we would be fine. And so there's that. Men can kind of see the physical act of sex as that's our oneness. And on the flip side, women come in and their heart cry is, I don't feel loved. I don't feel important. I feel pushed to the side. I don't feel cherished or treasured. And they want the emotional intimacy. And they're saying, hey, if I'm supposed to be giving physical intimacy, and let me say, physical intimacy and sexual intimacy are different. because physical intimacy doesn't have to involve sex. But they're saying, hey, if I'm supposed to be, ready, willing, and able to have sex, but I'm not getting this emotional part, a woman will say they feel more like they're being used. It's more like a prostitute of you're using my body, but it can be traumatizing. It can build resentment. And so there's a part of they're both wanting a bonded feeling, but they're complaining about it because they both feel it in different ways.
Mm.
So his needs aren't being met physically. Her needs are not being met emotionally, so they're warring with each other as a result.
And then you're at a standoff.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not giving you what you want, and I'm not going to give you what you want.
That's
I
right.
can tell you, I'm a man. I can tell you if men
This ought to be good.
if men are coming to you for counseling, with their wife and saying, if you could just get her to give me sex, everything will be okay. I can tell men how to get their wife to give them sex.
Oh,
You want to hear this?
go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, we're all ears.
Okay.
Do
Tim
tell.
and I are ready to hear this. Do tell.
Here's the answer. Find out what their love language is and begin to speak it. And for me, there was a lot of frustration early on within our marriage because I was trying to speak my wife's love language through what I thought was her love language, and it was I liked gifts, so I loved to give her flowers, gifts, and she would not respond to that. She's just like, okay, whatever. And I've discovered now and I tell our guys in our church this all the time, go home, wash the dishes, go home, take out the trash, go home and sweep the floor, help with the laundry, be a team within that household and help each other out. And here's the biggest key of that. Do it without expectations of sex.
With no strings attached.
With no strings attached.
Right.
Just it's great if there
If that's
are
the
strings,
benefit.
but if you will do it with no expectations, without strings attached to it, your wife will feel that you're doing it for her instead of for an action in the bedroom, or let me say some action in the bedroom. And so in my opinion, it goes back to Ephesians chapter 5, just simply serving your spouse, honoring them, loving them, and respecting them. But here's the problem. A lot of guys aren't willing to do that. And you get to that place where you are in that standoff and you haven't had sex in weeks, months, whatever. And as a result, you've kind of dug in your heels and you're like, I ain't doing nothing for her. So is there truth in what I'm saying?
There absolutely is. One of the other things I do with my married couples is I will have each of them make a top 10 list of what are 10 things my partner can do for me that makes me feel loved, and they need to be measurable. So it can't be just let me be me. It is things like, one partner may say, you know what, when you bring me coffee in the morning when I'm getting ready, that makes me feel loved. Or one may say, when you tell me you're proud of me, and that is the love languages. But I will have them actually give each other a top 10 list, and then I'll give them the homework of, now I want you to work off that list. Now I want you to begin doing these things. And the accountability when they come back, I'm saying, okay, what did you do? And when there's an accountability on both sides, because the standoff is, I will ask couples, what do you want in your marriage? And a typical response from men is, I want to be my wife's hero. I want to be respected. I want partnership. And women will say, I want to be cherished and loved. And so then I will ask them, okay, when you guys have your disagreements, what are your knee-jerk reactions? What are your responses or your reactions? Because if I'm screaming and yelling and I'm demanding my own way, how do I expect my partner to see me as their hero? How's that going to work for me? Or if I'm complaining and nagging, and if I'm wanting appreciation, how's that going to work for me? So there's a part of in counseling, I'll really try and get them to see their accountability of my actions are not getting me what I'm wanting. In fact, it's disconnecting rather than connecting us.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I like that. I think that you said about making the list because everybody references the love language these days. It's a very well-known book, but the reality is, give me some practical things that I can do to show you that I love you. And this my wife knows I hate washing dishes. I mean, I absolutely, I cook dinner all the time, but I hate washing dishes, and that's our deal. I cook, she cleans.
That's right. That's our agreement.
But if I, pick up a dish towel, wash the dishes, and help her out. And that's what it comes down to. The big part is just simply helping her out.
Mm-hmm.
It could be folding some laundry.
I always tell men, I tell men on their top 10 list, they can only list sex one time. Because if I
Well,
don't do that,
Oh, that's funny.
the top 10 are sex, 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 sex.
Yes, yes.
well, and I've said this before that I actually the five love languages. There's a
You
sixth
you have your
that I
own.
have created,
Yes.
and I may write a book called The Sixth Love Language, and it's every woman that, physical touch. Every man believes that their love language is physical touch,
Mm-hmm.
but physical touch is not just sex. It's holding your wife's hand. It's putting your arm around them.
Right.
It's giving them a hug. And to me, there's that sixth love language, which is quality touch.
Quality touch, not quality time and physical.
Not
Yeah,
quality
you
time,
combine
quality
two
touch.
to make your own.
Just going to be able to really enjoy spending time
Doesn't
together.
that sound like a man response?
That's a man response right there.
I'm thinking just make sure you have a whole chapter on what quality touch is to a woman versus quality touch to
There
a man.
you go.
Well, there
That
is
is
a topic that
hilarious.
I do want to broach today. There's something that has come to the surface recently. Stacey and I were having a conversation
Mhm.
about this about 2 weeks ago called gray divorce. And honestly, I was very shocked. I know that we've had some conversations as well, and some of the things you shared with us have just shocked us. And a lot of people may not even be aware of what gray divorce is. Kind of let our listeners know what that is, what it looks like.
Sure. Gray divorce is the highest part of divorce, that is the rising numbers. And gray divorce is people anywhere, 50, but really 60 and over. They call it gray divorce because, it implies aging, gray hair. And the numbers have almost doubled in the last while. It's gone like from 7% to 15% of people that are actually, they've been married for decades and now they're actually going for divorce. I'm seeing more and more couples that have been married 30, 40, 50 years, and they're talking about divorce. And reasons for that, one of it is the stigma of divorce has gone down. People are living longer. And so now that we're living longer, we're looking at it as this is the second half of my life. And if I haven't really been ecstatically happy, now I'm going to go live my dreams, do my things, make my choices, and this is the time for me. A big part is the transitions. It's a time of transitions like empty nesting. And if you haven't been really tending to your marriage and keeping your marriage a priority, so often we're raising kids in, like, we're doing transactional living, parallel living, and you take the kids here, I take the kids here, we talk about the kids, but we're not nurturing our marriage. And so then when we empty nest, we're strangers. And when I look at you, I decide I don't like you very much anymore. So now I want to leave.
So are you saying that this is the fastest growing segment of divorce? Is this
This
age
is
bracket?
this age bracket is one of the highest age brackets of divorce. The people are waiting longer and longer to get married now, so divorce rates are lower for the people that are waiting longer for to get married because they're being choosier, pickier. They're getting their lives kind of set in their careers. But this is the area of divorce that is really increasing.
That blows
Mhm.
my mind because to me, and this is just me talking, that should be the greatest years of your marriage.
Mhm.
Whenever you're in your retirement years, it's 50 plus, and we're at that age now. You can see
That
I
you have
fall
gray
within
hair.
the bracket you're talking about. I got this gray hair.
Mhm.
Stacy, not at all. Stacy,
No.
not at all. But we're at the empty nesting phase right now, and we are loving it. I
Yes.
mean, it's great to be. But of course,
Mhm.
the difference is we're best friends.
Sure. And that's really the part is that you're best friends. And if you're putting into, we're not just parents. And this is a complaint that I get from lots of men is, hey, my wife is wanting to spend all of her time with the kids. And if she has to choose between me and the kids, she's choosing the kids. And a part of that is women can get their affection if they're not getting that affection from their husband and feeling important and loved and seen, then they're
They get
going
it
to
from
go
the
to their
kids.
children. They will get it from their children. And when you go to the empty nest, men and women typically view it so different because men can look forward to the empty nest. Hey, we've successfully raised our kids. They're launching. Yeehaw, this is our time together.
Yes. Oh, that was definitely
Wi-
Jay. That's how he felt.
Women, we have spent 20 to 30 years of our life so invested in kids schedules and arranging things and doing things, and our roles as mom is so important to us, and then we empty nest and all of a sudden we don't know who we are. And so there's a part of grieving, transitioning, and if you don't have that friendship, you can build a friendship afterwards, but it's harder because we're in such a different place in life.
So what I'm hearing from you is the seeds for gray divorce were sown long before you got to the gray hair.
Absolutely. If you are putting your energy into your marriage, your best friends, you're cultivating that, you're making sure your needs are met together as a couple, you're not going to end up in gray divorce, most likely.
So if all your time and energy is spent on hobbies, kids, recreation, all these different things, instead of investing and pouring into your marriage, it's going to wind up in a bad way.
Mhm.
Going to end up in a bad way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I totally agree with that, how when we transitioned into empty nesting, and it's only been the last couple of years, that he was the most excited that our boys were out of the house. They could pay for their own way in life.
Paying them bills.
Yeah, we had more money in our bank account. We could do more, and I did have that season of grieving, because that was my whole, or what I felt like was my whole life, was just taking care of my
Sure.
boys. And but it didn't take too much time, that I was like, this really is a great season, and people really do need to look forward to it.
That's right.
It's like we get to do things. We can pick up and take a trip. We can do all kinds of different things, like when we were first married. We just have more money to be able to go and do some things. And so but I do know that we did intentionally sow into our marriage when our kids were younger. We took time for date nights, and we took family trips, but we also took, trips as a couple. And so we did put that work into that, so that this season of our life can be exciting
Well, Kim,
together.
I don't want you to think that I'm a monster. I really did. Whenever my kids went,
He's not a
look, the
monster.
kids, when they moved out of the house, like Stacy, I grieved, but the difference
In a
was
different
mine
way.
lasted about 30 seconds, and it was there for about 30 seconds, and then it was gone.
Yes.
Stacy's lasted a little bit longer.
And that's normal. That is normal. That is typically the way it plays out. And it doesn't mean that Stacy wasn't looking forward to the adventure time with you and the empty nest years. She was doing that, and at the same time, she was also grieving. And so they can coexist. It doesn't mean I'm not as excited about what we're going to do together. It just means I also have to work through a transition, because so much of who I am, and women tend to, we find our identities more in our relationships than men do typically. If you go out and you meet another man and you're introducing yourself, the average man is going to say, "Hi, I'm Jay. Who are you? What do you do for a living?" And so you talk about what you do for a living. Well, women, we typically don't do that. I'm a therapist, but when I go and meet another woman, I'm saying, "Hi, I'm Kim. Are you married? Do you have children? Tell me about your family." And that's more, just again, women tend to be more emotional, more relational. Men are more, their identity is more in their careers. That's so much more a part of their identity, which is why at retirement, men can go through more of a transition of, okay, this is who I've been for so long with my career. And so we just do it in different ways at different times.
I can see that. I can see men struggling whenever their career comes to a conclusion where they're retiring. That would almost be like a season of their life is closing, and that would be something to grieve over. So
Their
that's
identity.
fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I've enjoyed this
This
conversation
has been
today.
great. This has been
It's
great.
a lot of great things that I think are going to be awesome for our listeners to be able to build into their marriages and work on their marriages. And so what I heard you basically from all the way through this conversation, it's I'm kind of, my takeaway is this: you got to work on your marriage from the time that you get married, or even before you get married, doing the premarital, all the way to the time you take your final breath. You should be working on your marriage.
That's right. Marriage is hard work. It is hard work, but it is worth it. There are benefits. You love it. It's kind of like parenting. Parenting to me is like the hardest job in the world, but it's also wonderful. Marriage is hard and wonderful.
Yes.
Well, and I remind my wife on a regular basis that she's the second best thing that ever happened to me. The first was Jesus. The second thing was her. And as long as my life is founded on Christ and her life is founded on Christ, it means our marriage is founded on Christ. And that is what, it doesn't mean you're not going to have issues you're not going to walk through, but boy, whenever that's the foundation, it makes it a lot more stable to walk through things.
One thing I would say is, especially for Christian couples, is when you are going through a hard time, or even before you're going to have a discussion about something that you've typically gotten into conflict on, I encourage you, sit down together and actually pray and invite the Lord to come into that space with you. Because it's really hard when you're both humbling yourselves and we're getting our egos out of the way and we're saying, you know what, Lord, come and help us to work through this. Give us your eyes for each other. Help us to do this in an honoring way. It's hard to get into where we're name calling and blaming and criticizing and nagging. And so don't leave God out of the conflict.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yes,
well,
very important.
Kim, thank you for being a part of Love Like Crazy today.
I have really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
I just love you, Kim, and thank you so much for being here.
Why don't you do this? Tell our listeners where they can find you at
Yes.
through your social media. How can they connect with you?
Sure. On my social media, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Kimberly Haar, and that's Haar. My counseling website is there'shopehere.com, and my writer, author, speaker website is just kimberlyhaar.com.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for being a part of our episode today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And today, as we close out this episode, I just want to echo a couple things that Kim, she brought to the forefront is this, that your marriage is something that you need to work on from the time you step into it to the time you step off this earth. It is so important that you continue to build your friendship with one another. You're going to go through a lot of different seasons. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs and all arounds. That's what makes marriage so great. And if you will work on that marriage, if you will continue to invest in your marriage and truly work on being best friends with one another, you can make it through anything that this world brings against you. But let me encourage you in this. You guys know that we are people of faith. You know that our occupation is we pastor, but we've always approached through this podcast as simply Jay and Stacy and approaching life in that way. But I'm going to tell you straight up, what has been the true strength within our marriage is our personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so if you've never surrendered your life to Christ, I wholeheartedly encourage you to look to him and accept his love and his forgiveness within your life and let your life and your marriage be built on Christ. So once again, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast today. If you have liked what you've heard, then make sure that you give us a review, that you comment, because your comments and your reviews are what help to push this podcast forward. So like, subscribe, share, let everybody know about it. And as always, I'm Jay.
And I'm Stacy.
And this is Love Like Crazy.